The final battle began simultaneously across 7-star systems as human-led fleets engaged Devourer forces that had been preparing for this moment. The key was not victory in any traditional sense, but creating enough chaotic interference to reach the cache activation points while maintaining timing so precise it bordered on miraculous. Jake's assault on the central cache proved the most challenging because the main Devourer intelligence had studied human tactics longer than any other enemy force. The battle became a deadly dance of evolving strategies where Jake had to stay unpredictable while the enemy learned to predict unpredictability itself. The solution came to Jake in a moment of desperate inspiration. He stopped trying to be tactically clever and started following his emotions instead. When Pete's ship took damage, Jake broke formation to help him because that felt right. When Lisa detected civilians trapped on a converted station, Jake diverted his entire fleet to rescue them because abandoning people was not something humans did. The Devourers had algorithms for analyzing tactical decisions, but they had no way to process choices made from love, loyalty, and protective instinct. Jake's emotional responses created battle patterns that defied mathematical analysis because they were based on human relationships rather than strategic objectives. Admiral Swift's team faced overwhelming odds as they fought their way through a Devourer fleet that had been specifically designed to counter her previous tactics. Her solution was to stop being an admiral and start being a human being who cared about her crew. She made decisions based on keeping her people alive rather than achieving tactical goals. When young Ensign Kate Murphy's fighter was damaged, Admiral Swift personally flew out to escort her to safety despite leaving her command ship vulnerable. When Ben Clark's weapon systems failed, she ordered him to ram enemy vessels because she knew he would rather die fighting than retreat safely. Her emotional leadership created tactical chaos that the enemy could not predict or counter. Pete Collins discovered that his assigned cache was more damaged than the architect records indicated. The quantum resonators needed to activate the disruption engine had been degraded by 50,000 years of neutron star radiation. Repairing them required connecting incompatible technologies using methods that no engineering manual described. His solution was pure human intuition. Pete stopped trying to understand how the alien technology worked and started feeling how it wanted to work. He connected power systems that should have exploded and created feedback loops that violated basic physics but somehow produced the quantum harmonics needed for cache activation. Tony Martinez's smuggling expertise proved crucial when his team had to penetrate a Devourer blockade using routes that existed only in spacer folklore. He navigated through gravitational anomalies by following stories his grandfather had told him about shortcuts through twisted space. His path made no scientific sense, but it worked because human storytelling had preserved knowledge that formal charts had lost. Steve Rodriguez's mercenary unit faced direct combat with Devourer shapeshifters in a battle that tested everything humans understood about fighting for survival. The enemy could copy their weapons and armor, but they could not copy the bond between soldiers who had chosen to fight together despite having no logical reason to trust each other. When Rodriguez's second-in-command was killed by a shapeshifter, wearing a friendly face, the mercenary unit responded with a level of coordinated violence that surprised even themselves. They had learned to recognize each other through subtle behavioral cues that went beyond appearance or voice. Their paranoia and aggression became weapons against an enemy that relied on deception. Amy Chin's hacking team worked frantically to maintain communications between the 7 assault groups while Devourer electronic warfare systems tried to disrupt their coordination. Her solution was to abandon secure channels entirely and broadcast their messages using human cultural references embedded in what looked like random radio static. The Devourers intercepted every transmission but could not decode communications, based on references to 20th century Earth movies and forgotten song lyrics. Amy's team created a communications network that worked because it assumed shared human experiences that no alien intelligence could duplicate or understand. Zara Kim's pilots approached their cache through conditions that made normal flying impossible. The nebula surrounding the Architect facility disrupted sensors and created electromagnetic storms that would have grounded any rational pilot. Zara's squadron flew through the chaos using instincts they could not explain and skills they had learned from years of breaking flight regulations. As the cascade activation began, the true nature of the disruption engine revealed itself. The weapon did not destroy the Devourers but instead infected their collective intelligence with quantum uncertainty. Their swarm networks, which had operated with perfect coordination for millions of years, suddenly became confused and contradictory. The effect spread through Devourer space like a virus made of pure chaos. Units that had worked together seamlessly began acting independently. Command structures that had processed information instantly became clogged with random data. The vast intelligence that had consumed galaxies fractured into millions of separate entities that could no longer coordinate their actions, but victory came at a price that Jake felt in his bones. Several ships were lost when their crews chose to manually operate damaged systems knowing they would not survive. Lisa Park stayed at her communications post when her section lost atmosphere because maintaining the coordination link was more important than reaching a rescue pod. Pete Collins sacrificed his own ship's power core to provide the energy needed for cache activation. He made the choice without hesitation because the mission mattered more than his personal survival. His last transmission was a simple message telling Jake that the chaos coordination was working perfectly. The aftermath of the battle left Jake standing in the damaged command center of the Second Chance, surrounded by survivors who looked like they had been through hell and somehow found their way back. The galaxy was safe, but the cost had been measured in people he cared about who had chosen duty over survival. Admiral Swift found Jake 3 days later at the memorial service for the crews who had not made it home. She looked older than her years, but her eyes held something that had been missing during the dark days of conventional warfare: hope for the future. "The Council wants to offer you any position you want," she said. "Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense, Director of Strategic Planning, or Ambassador Plenipotentiary to Earth? You can write your own ticket." Jake looked out at the stars where new worlds were already beginning to form from the matter the Devourers had released. The quantum chaos of the disruption engine was creating planets and solar systems that followed no known patterns of stellar formation. Life would evolve there in ways that no one could predict. "I want to captain an exploration ship," Jake said finally. "Something fast enough to reach those new worlds and see what kinds of civilizations grow from controlled chaos." Admiral Swift smiled for the first time in months. "I thought you might say that. There's a prototype vessel called New Horizons waiting for you at the shipyard. She's designed for long-range exploration using hybrid human-architect technology." Jake looked at the crew members who had survived the final battle. They were a mixed group of humans and aliens who had learned that chaos properly applied could create as well as destroy. They had become something new, beings who could think both logically and emotionally as the situation required. The galaxy had learned that diversity of thought was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated. Different approaches to problems created solutions that no single species could achieve alone. The man who had once been banned from every civilized world was now preparing to explore worlds that had never known civilization. 3 months later, the New Horizons departed from Earth carrying a crew that represented every species in the galaxy. Their mission was to make contact with the new civilizations emerging from the quantum chaos left behind by the disruption engine. It was a job that required beings who could handle the unpredictable and find order in apparent madness. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new ship and watched the stars wheel past the viewports. Somewhere out there were worlds where chaos and order danced together in patterns that created entirely new forms of life. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans had always been good at handling. Training other species to fight like humans proved nearly impossible. The Centauri Federation's best pilots tried to learn random flight patterns, but their logical minds kept searching for hidden mathematical principles. The Zephyrian military attempted chaos tactics, but their cultural emphasis on harmony made them coordinate unconsciously Even when trying to act independently, Jake found himself running the strangest military academy in galactic history. His instructors were smugglers, pirates, and misfits who taught courses in creative thinking and controlled madness. The curriculum included classes on emotional decision-making, intuitive problem-solving, and the fine art of making things up as you go along. Only a few individuals from each species proved capable of thinking like humans. These were usually the outcasts and rebels who had been rejected by their own societies for being too unpredictable. They formed an elite mixed force that the Council officially called Special Operations Division, but everyone else referred to as the Chaos Corps. Earth had mobilized its entire space-capable population when news of the Devourer threat reached home. The human homeworld had always been considered a backwater by galactic standards because humans refused to follow proper colonization protocols. They built cities in impossible locations and developed technologies that worked despite violating established scientific principles. Captain Nina Foster commanded a convoy of converted cargo haulers that had been transformed into warships using salvaged alien technology and human engineering creativity. Her ships looked like flying scrapyards, but they carried experimental weapons that the Devourers had never encountered. When enemy scouts tried to analyze her vessel's capabilities, they found systems that changed specifications randomly every few minutes. Commander Rick Barnes coordinated refugee evacuations, using flight paths that existed only in his imagination. He moved civilian populations through hyperspace routes that navigation computers insisted were impossible while maintaining communication. Through codes based on human cultural references that no alien intelligence could decipher. Helen Ross had decoded the complete activation sequence for the disruption engine. The weapon required 7 teams to reach 7 cache sites scattered across the galaxy and activate them using different types of unpredictable patterns. Each team would need to fight through heavy Devourer defenses while maintaining precise timing coordination. Despite acting completely independently, the mission structure was a paradox that only human minds seemed capable of understanding. They needed to synchronize their actions across impossible distances while ensuring that no 2 teams used similar tactics. Success required both perfect coordination and complete chaos at the same time. Jake assigned himself to the primary cache at the galactic center where the main Devourer swarm had established its command nexus. The enemy had converted an entire star system into a processing facility that consumed matter and energy to fuel their expansion. Fighting through to the cache would require penetrating defenses that adapted and improved with every attack. Admiral Swift took command of the second team with authorization to recruit volunteers from Council forces who showed aptitude for unconventional warfare. Her crew included Zara Kim as lead pilot and Ben Clark as weapons coordinator, along with carefully selected aliens who had demonstrated ability to think outside their species. Normal parameters. Pete Collins led the engineering team assigned to the most technically challenging cache hidden inside a neutron star's magnetic field. His crew consisted entirely of humans because no other species could handle the intuitive leaps required to operate architect technology. They would need to modify their ships continuously during the approach because the cache's defenses changed. Every few seconds, Lisa Park coordinated communications between all 7 teams, using encryption methods based on human literature, music, and cultural references. The Devourers had learned to crack every mathematical code the galaxy used, but they could not decode messages hidden in references to ancient human poetry and obsolete entertainment programs. The Devourers had begun adapting to human unpredictability by infiltrating human crews with shapeshifters. These scouts could copy human appearance and behavior, but they could not truly understand human emotions or cultural references. The paranoia this created actually helped because humans naturally suspected anyone who seemed too logical or too cooperative. Amy Chun's hacking team had developed security protocols that relied on human intuition rather than systematic verification. They could identify Devourer infiltrators by asking questions that required emotional responses or cultural knowledge that could not be copied. The tests were unscientific but effective because they relied on subtle behavioral cues that only humans understood. Each team faced unique challenges as they fought their way to their assigned cache sites. Tony Martinez used his smuggling expertise to navigate his team through devourer blockades using routes that existed only in spacer legends and half-remembered star charts. His path to the cache required jumping through gravitational anomalies that navigation computers insisted were fictional. Steve Rodriguez's mercenary unit was assigned to the cache hidden in a black hole's accretion disk. They would need to fight their way through devourer defenses while flying at the edge of an event horizon using piloting skills that defied physics. The margin for error was so small that one wrong move would tear their ships apart or trap them in curved spacetime forever. Zara Kim found herself leading a mixed squadron of human and alien pilots who had learned to fly by instinct rather than instrumentation. They approached their cache through a nebula where sensors were useless and navigation required following electromagnetic currents that felt right rather than looked right on tactical displays. The preparation phase took weeks because they needed to coordinate timing across 7 different star systems while ensuring that each team developed completely different tactical approaches. Jake found himself managing a logistics nightmare that would have driven any rational commander insane. But as the countdown began, something remarkable happened. The human crew stopped worrying about the impossibility of their mission and started focusing on the people they were trying to protect. Their chaos tactics became less about confusing the enemy and more about expressing their determination to prevent another new Terra from happening. The Devourers had learned to predict logical responses and adapt to systematic attacks. But they had never encountered an enemy that fought not because it made sense but because it was the right thing to do. Human emotions and protective instincts created tactical patterns that no algorithm could analyze or duplicate. Admiral Swift stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched 7 different countdown timers approach zero. Each timer represented a team that would soon be fighting for their lives using tactics that violated every principle of military science. The fate of the galaxy depended on beings who had been rejected by civilized society for being too unpredictable. All teams report ready, Lisa's voice came through the communications array. Chaos coordination is go for activation sequence. Jake's voice came through the static from the galactic center where Devourer activity made normal communication impossible. Remember, we're not trying to be unpredictable. We're trying to be human. Don't think about what you should do. Think about what you want to do. The final battle was about to begin. 7 teams would attack 7 targets using methods that made no logical sense but felt absolutely right to the beings who had volunteered to execute them. The galaxy's survival depended on chaos, creativity, and the stubborn human refusal to accept that impossible things could not be done. Word spread through the galaxy's underworld faster than official council communications. Jake Morrison and his chaos tactics had saved Tapler 7 when 3 full battle fleets had failed. In bars and trading posts across the rim worlds, humans who had been hiding their nature started to stand up straighter. Maybe being unpredictable was not a flaw after all. Tony Martinez was a smuggler who knew every back route and hidden passage in the outer systems. He had spent 20 years avoiding council patrols by never taking the same path twice and never following standard shipping lanes. When he heard about Jake's success, he loaded his ship with medical supplies and headed for the asteroid base that was becoming humanity's unofficial headquarters. Amy June worked as a freelance computer specialist because no legitimate corporation could handle her methods. She solved problems by making intuitive leaps that her alien supervisors found disturbing and unscientific. Her code worked perfectly, but it violated every programming standard in the galactic database. When the call went out for unconventional thinkers, she was on the first transport heading rimward. Steve Rodriguez had been discharged from 3 different mercenary companies for refusing to follow standard combat procedures. He preferred to improvise his tactics based on battlefield conditions rather than stick to predetermined battle plans. His success rate was excellent, but his methods made his commanders nervous. He brought his own ship and a crew of human misfits who shared his philosophy. Jake's asteroid base grew from a hidden, salvage operation to a bustling military installation in less than 2 weeks. Humans arrived daily bringing ships that looked like they were held together with hope and stubbornness. None of them would have passed a council inspection, but they all had something in common. They worked because their crews refused to accept that things should not work. The Galactic Council was facing a political crisis that threatened to tear apart 10,000 years of stable government. Conservative members blamed humanity's chaotic influence for their military failures. They argued that random tactics were a sign of desperation rather than strategy, and that following human advice would lead to complete collapse of military discipline. Ambassador Kate Phillips found herself defending humanity's contribution while secretly coordinating with Admiral Swift through back channels. The Council needed Jake's expertise but could not officially acknowledge that their traditional methods were failing. The political double game was exhausting and dangerous for everyone. INVOLVD Dr. Helen Ross led an expedition to the first confirmed architect cache located in the gas giant Tiffon's core. The facility was a massive construct that had been hidden beneath layers of metallic hydrogen for 50,000 years. Getting there required flying through gravitational fields that would crush any ship using standard navigation techniques. Zara Kim piloted the lead vessel through the gas giant's upper atmosphere using flight patterns that looked like artistic expression rather than aerospace engineering. She followed electromagnetic currents and pressure variations that her instruments could barely detect. When asked to explain her navigation choices, she said they felt right and left it at that. The architect cache was protected by security systems that tested visitors in ways no council species could understand. Logic puzzles that had multiple correct answers. Mathematical problems that required intuitive leaps rather than systematic calculation. Defensive barriers that responded to emotional states rather than technology. Pete Collins found himself connecting alien machinery using principles that violated everything he had learned in engineering school. The architect systems worked by embracing controlled chaos rather than fighting it. Human intuition and willingness to try impossible solutions proved more valuable than advanced technical training. Inside the cache, they discovered blueprints for the disruption engine. The weapon was designed to work by introducing quantum uncertainty into Devourer swarm networks, but operating it required a fleet coordination pattern that was mathematically impossible to plan and could only be executed through spontaneous decision-making. Lisa Park studied the technical specifications with growing excitement and terror. "It's not really a weapon," she explained to Jake. "It's more like a virus that infects their collective intelligence with randomness. But all 7 cache sites have to activate simultaneously using different chaos patterns. No 2 approaches can be the same." Meanwhile, the Devourers launched their main assault on the core worlds. The attack on New Terra lasted 18 hours and ended with the planet's complete conversion. 20 billion people simply vanished along with their cities, their technology, and their entire civilization. The planet became another smooth gray sphere orbiting a star that suddenly seemed very lonely. Traditional council forces crumbled as the enemy adapted to every strategy within minutes of engagement. Battle fleets that had protected the galaxy for centuries were turned into scrap metal by opponents who used their own tactics better than they did. Panic spread through the core worlds as refugees fled toward the rim systems. Admiral Swift received orders to bring Jake in for a desperate council session. The politicians had finally accepted that conventional warfare was useless against an enemy that learned faster than they could teach. But when Council security forces tried to arrest Jake at his asteroid base, they led Devourer scouts directly to his location. The battle that followed became legendary among the human crews who witnessed it. Jake's people fought with salvaged weapons, improvised tactics, and pure emotional determination. When Ben Clark's ship was overwhelmed by enemy scouts, he chose to ram them rather than retreat. His sacrifice created a gap in enemy formations that no logical analysis could have predicted, but human intuition exploited instantly. Steve Rodriguez led a boarding party onto a converted Devourer vessel using combat techniques that would have horrified a military academy instructor. His team fought with kitchen knives and welding torches when their proper weapons were destroyed. They won through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat rather than superior firepower or tactical advantage. The victory cost them dearly, but it proved something important. Human chaos tactics worked even in desperate situations against overwhelming odds. The enemy could copy human weapons and human ships, but they could not copy human emotions or human determination to protect people they cared about. After the battle, Jake stood in his damaged command center and looked at the casualty reports. Too many good people had died defending something they barely understood. But their sacrifice had shown the galaxy that the Devourers were not invincible. They could be fought, and they could be beaten by beings who refused to think logically. Admiral Swift arrived the next day with a formal council mandate and an unofficial apology. The politicians had finally voted to grant humanity full membership in the Galactic Council with equal representation. It only took an extinction-level threat to make them recognize that human unpredictability was a feature rather than a bug. The Council wants you to coordinate the final assault, Admiral Swift told Jake. 7 teams to 7 cache sites with complete tactical authority. You'll have ships from every member species and the authority to use any methods you consider necessary. Jake looked out at his growing fleet of human misfits and aliens who had learned to think like humans. They were a motley collection of ships and crews that would never pass a formal inspection, but they had something the enemy could not copy or adapt to: the willingness to make decisions based on hope and stubbornness rather than logic and probability. Tell the Council we accept, Jake said. But we do this our way. No interference, no second-guessing, and no request to follow standard procedures. Chaos only works if you commit to it completely. The final battle was about to begin, and humanity would lead it using the very qualities that had made them outcasts in galactic society. Their greatest weakness was about to become the galaxy's greatest strength. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen panic like this. Representatives from 47 worlds sat in emergency session while reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Devourers were not just attacking random colonies anymore. They were moving with purpose toward the core worlds where billions lived in cities that had never known war. Chancellor Vexhai of the Centauri Federation stood at the central podium with his 4 arms gesturing frantically. His species had ruled the Council for 3 centuries through logic and careful planning. Now their greatest strength was becoming their greatest weakness. Our fleets report total engagement failure, he announced to the assembled representatives. The enemy adapts to our weapon systems within minutes of first contact. Standard battle formations become useless when the enemy copies them perfectly and turns them against us. In the back of the chamber, the human representative sat quietly and took notes. Ambassador Kate Phillips was young for her position, but she had learned to keep her mouth shut during council debates. Humans were tolerated members of galactic society, but their opinions carried little weight. Their chaotic nature and unpredictable emotions were considered primitive by the older species. Admiral Swift was not in the council chambers because she was technically a fugitive. After the incident at Neutral Station, she had stolen the experimental warship Defiance and disappeared into deep space. The Council had issued arrest warrants, but they were too busy fighting an impossible war to pursue one. Rogue Admiral, the Defiance was a new class of vessel designed to test unconventional warfare concepts. It had experimental weapons, non-standard defensive systems, and crew quarters designed for mixed-species operations. Admiral Swift had chosen her crew carefully from personnel files marked with disciplinary problems and creative thinking. Zara Kim had been the best pilot in the fleet until she started ignoring flight regulations and developing her own combat maneuvers. The review board called her tactics reckless and unorthodox. Admiral Swift called them exactly what she needed. Ben Clark was a weapons specialist who had been discharged for questioning the effectiveness of standard council armaments. He had theories about adaptive targeting and random firing patterns that made his superior officers uncomfortable. Admiral Swift gave him permission to test those theories, the Defiance found. Jake's ship hiding in an asteroid field near the ruins of Neutral Station. The station was still there, but it had been changed. The Devourers had converted it into something that hurt to look at directly. Twisted metal grew like cancer across its surface, and lights moved in patterns that made no mathematical sense. Jake came aboard the Defiance with Pete and Lisa. The meeting in Admiral Swift's ready room was tense because none of them were sure who was the fugitive and who was the authority anymore. The old rules had stopped working when the enemy started copying everything the Council threw at them. "We need to work together," Admiral Swift said without preamble. "The Council's traditional approach is failing completely. Every time we send a fleet, the Devourers learn our tactics and use them better than we do." Jake sat across from his former mentor and tried to read her expression. Carol Swift had always been controlled and professional. Now she looked tired and desperate. The weight of command during an impossible war was wearing her down. "The Architect records show their might. Be a way to fight them," Jake said. "But it requires doing everything wrong according to standard military doctrine." Pete Collins had been studying the alien technology for weeks, and his engineering mind had started to grasp concepts that defied normal logic. "Their defensive systems worked on chaos theory," he explained. "Instead of trying to control every variable, they embraced randomness and uncertainty." Lisa Park activated her tablet and showed them tactical displays from the Architect database. "Look at these battle formations. Nothing makes sense from a strategic standpoint. Ships moving in random patterns with no apparent coordination. Weapons firing at empty space. It looks like complete confusion." Zara Kim studied the displays with professional interest. As a pilot, she had always been taught to fly with precision and follow predetermined flight paths. These Architect tactics look like amateur hour mistakes. "You want us to fly like we don't know what we're doing?" "The enemy adapts by predicting logical responses," Jake explained. "If we stop being logical, they can't predict us. Humans are already good at being unpredictable. Other species find it much harder." Admiral Swift made a decision that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. "We'll test your theory. But first we need to rescue some people." The research station at Kepler 7 had been sending distress signals for 6 hours. 300 scientists and their families were trapped while Devour scouts methodically converted the facility. Council rescue fleets had failed to break through the enemy perimeter using conventional assault tactics. Jake and Admiral Swift planned their rescue mission using principles that violated every rule in the tactical manual. Instead of approaching in formation, their ships would arrive from random directions at random times. Instead of coordinating their attacks, each crew would act independently based on intuition and split-second decisions. Zara Kim launched first in a modified fighter that she flew like she was drunk. She approached the station in a spiral pattern that made no navigational sense while firing her weapons at targets that did not exist. The Devourer scouts tried to predict her next move and failed. Because she was making it up as she went along, Ben Clark followed in the Defiance with weapons systems programmed for random targeting. His plasma cannons fired in patterns based on chaos mathematics that hurt enemy algorithms. When the Devourers tried to adapt to his tactics, he changed them completely based on emotional impulses rather than strategic thinking. Jake brought up the rear in the second chance with Pete pushing their salvaged engines beyond safe limits. They flew through the battle like a drunk meteor while Lisa used human cultural references to create communication codes. The enemy could not decode. The rescue worked because it should not have worked. The Devourers had adapted to logical military responses, but they could not adapt to pure human intuition and emotional decision-making. Within 30 minutes, they had extracted 200 survivors and destroyed half the enemy scouts. Dr. Helen Ross was among the rescued scientists. She was a xenorchaeologist who had spent her career studying Architect ruins. Her research had led her to conclusions that the academic establishment found uncomfortable and unscientific. "The Architects didn't disappear," she told Jake as medical teams treated the survivors. "They left behind instructions. Hidden in their ruins are blueprints for a weapon designed specifically to fight the Devourers." But activating it requires coordination patterns so chaotic that no logical species could execute them. Jake looked around at his mixed crew of humans and aliens who had all been rejected by their respective societies for being too unpredictable or too creative. For the first time since his disgrace, he began to think that maybe being the galaxy's outcasts was exactly what they needed to be. Admiral Swift was studying casualty reports when she realized something important. We didn't lose a single ship. Every time the Council sends conventional forces, they lose 60% of their fleet in the first engagement. We used human chaos tactics and came through without a scratch. The implications were staggering. Everything the galaxy had learned about warfare was useless against an enemy that could copy and improve upon logical tactics. But humans had never been logical. Their emotional responses and intuitive leaps were considered flaws by other species. Against the Devourers, those flaws might be the only hope for survival. 3 weeks passed before the first colony went silent. New Geneva was a mining world on the edge of Council space with 50,000 people working the asteroid belts. One day they were sending regular reports about ore shipments. The next day there was nothing but empty space where their communications satellites used to be. Admiral Carol Swift stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the sensor readings that made no sense. The planet was still there, but it was wrong. The oceans were gone, the cities were gone. Even the mountains had been scraped away, leaving behind a smooth gray sphere of lifeless rock. Any signs of weapons discharge? She asked her tactical officer. None, Admiral. No radiation signatures, no debris fields, no evidence of bombardment. It's like everything was just taken away. Carol had seen many terrible things in her 30 years of service, but nothing like this. The colony had not been destroyed. It had been emptied. Every trace of life and civilization had vanished without leaving so much as a scratch on the underlying rock. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was 3 systems away trying to understand technology that should not exist. The alien ship they had found was full of devices that worked in ways that hurt his brain to think about. Pete Collins had managed to connect some of their power systems to the second chance, but the energy readings made him nervous. It's like they built their machines to work with chaos instead of order, Pete said. He was lying under a panel with wires sparking around his head. Human engineering tries to control everything. This stuff embraces the things we can't control. Lisa Puck had been working on the alien database for weeks. The symbols were starting to make sense in a way that bypassed her brain and went straight to her understanding. The architects had been advanced beyond anything the current galaxy could imagine. They had built worlds and guided the evolution of entire species. Then something had driven them to hide their knowledge and disappear. I found something, Lisa called from her workstation. The screen showed a star map with red markers spreading across it like a disease. The architects called them Devourers. They come from the darkness between galaxies. They travel in swarms and consume everything they find. Jake looked at the map and felt cold despite the warm air in the ship. The red markers showed a pattern of consumption moving steadily through architect space. World after world had been stripped clean before the architects finally scattered their knowledge and fled to parts unknown. How long ago did this happen? Jake asked. Lisa checked the timestamps. About 50,000 years. The architects left warnings hidden in their technology. They said the Devourers would return when they had consumed enough matter to fuel their journey to the next galaxy. Pete crawled out from under the panel. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. I just intercepted a council emergency. Broadcast. 2 more colonies have gone silent. Meridian, Prime, and Kepler Station. Both stripped clean just like in those old records. Jake stared at the alien star map and realized that history was repeating itself. The Devourers had returned. And the galaxy was about to learn what the architects had learned 50,000 years ago. Some enemies could not be fought with conventional weapons or traditional tactics. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message. Admiral Swift's face appeared on the screen, looking older than Jake remembered. Her uniform was perfect as always. but her eyes showed the strain of command during a crisis no one understood. "Jake, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "3 worlds are gone and we have no idea how or why. The Council is in panic mode and people are demanding answers. We don't have." Jake knew this conversation would come eventually. Carol Swift had been like a mother to him during his early career. She had recommended him for the diplomatic corps and watched him rise through the ranks. She had also been the one forced to end his career when his temper got the better of his judgment. "What do you want from me, Carol?" he asked. "Information. You found that alien ship and then ran away with it. Now we have colonies disappearing in ways that match your description of ancient warnings. I don't believe in coincidences." Jake looked at Pete and Lisa. Both of them nodded. They were in this together now, whether they liked it or not. "Meet me at Neutral Station Gamma," Jake said. "Come alone or with minimal escort. We'll share what we know." Carol's expression showed she knew this was risky. Neutral Station Gamma was an unclaimed space where Council authority was limited. It was also the kind of place where people went when they wanted to avoid official attention. "I'll be there in 6 hours," she said and cut the transmission. The meeting at Neutral Station was supposed to be simple. Jake would share the architect data and Carol would coordinate the Council response. Instead, it became a trap when Council security forces tried to arrest Jake for theft of alien technology and violation of quarantine protocols. Jake found himself running through maintenance tunnels while stun blasts sparked off the walls around him. Pete and Lisa were somewhere behind him, but he could not stop to look for them. The station's security system had been turned against him, and every camera was tracking his movement. He reached the docking bay just as alarms started screaming for a different reason. Something was attacking the station from outside. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Jake could see shapes moving in space that were wrong in ways his eyes could not process. They flowed like liquid but had structure like metal. They attached themselves to the station's hull and began cutting their way inside. Admiral Swift appeared beside him, breathing hard from her own run through the corridors. Her perfectly arranged hair was messy and her uniform was torn. She had a plasma pistol in her hand and a look of grim determination on her face. "What are those things?" she asked. Jake watched the shapes pour through the hull breaches they had cut. They moved with purpose but without any recognizable form. As he watched, one of them encountered a station security guard. The shape flowed over the guard and then stood up, wearing his face and carrying his weapon. "Devourer scouts," Jake said. "They copy anything they touch and use it against you." The architect records called them the front edge of the swarm. More shapes were entering the station. They copied equipment, copied people, copied anything that might be useful. Within minutes, the docking bay was full of creatures that looked like station personnel but moved with an alien purpose. Carol Swift had fought in 3 wars and earned her rank through skill and courage. But she had never faced an enemy that could become anything it touched. Her training told her to establish fields of fire and create defensive positions. Her instincts told her that normal tactics would not work against these things. Jake grabbed her arm and pulled her toward his ship. "We need to leave now. These scouts are just the beginning." Jake Morrison stared at the empty coffee cup in his hands and wished it held something stronger. The cargo hold of his salvage ship smelled like rust and broken dreams. 5 years ago he had been Captain Morrison of the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Now he was just Jake, owner of a beat-up ship called Second Chance that barely kept itself together. "Pete." Collins walked into the hold, carrying a wrench and wearing his usual frown. Pete had gray hair and strong hands from years of fixing things that should not work but somehow did. He had followed Jake into exile when the rest of the galaxy decided Jake was trouble. That meant more to Jake than Pete would ever know. "The engine is making that noise again," Pete said. He wiped grease from his hands with an old cloth. "We need new parts, but we don't have money for new parts." Jake nodded and tried to look like he cared about engine parts. The truth was he spent most days trying not to think about how his life had gone so wrong. One mistake during a peace talk and everything fell apart. He had punched Ambassador Kelter in the face after a translation error made it sound like the alien was calling humans weak and stupid. The video of that punch had been seen on every world in the galaxy. Lisa Park came running from the communications room. She was young and still believed Jake could fix things. Her dark hair bounced as she ran, and her eyes were bright with excitement. Jake envied her hope. "Captain, I mean Jake," she said, catching her breath. "There's a signal." A distress call from the edge of known space. Jake stood up slowly. Distress calls meant people in trouble. People in trouble sometimes paid well for rescue. They needed money badly enough to take risks. "Where exactly?" he asked. Lisa checked her tablet. "Grid section 779. That's past all the map systems." "Nothing should be out there." Pete made a worried sound. "Nothing good happens past the maps. That's where smart people turn around and go home." Jake looked at his two crew members. Pete was right to be worried. Lisa was right to be excited. They were both right and both wrong. Jake had learned that life was full of choices between bad and worse. "Set course for the signal," he said. The second chance flew through space at a speed that was fast enough to get places, but slow enough to not break apart. Jake sat in the captain's chair and watched stars pass by the window. Each star reminded him of worlds where he was not welcome. The list was long and getting longer. 3 days later they found the source of the signal. It was a ship, but not like any ship Jake had ever seen. The hull was black metal covered in symbols that hurt to look at. The ship was bigger than anything. Humans built but smaller than the massive vessels the older alien races preferred. It drifted in space like a dead thing. "No life signs," Lisa reported. "But the power core is still active. That's strange." Pete studied the readings on his screen. "The metal composition is unknown. The energy signature doesn't match any known technology. This thing shouldn't exist." Jake made a decision that would change everything. "We're going aboard." They put on spacesuits and took a small shuttle to the alien ship. The airlock opened easily, which was the first surprise. The corridors inside were dark, but their lights showed walls covered in more of those painful symbols. The air was breathable, which was the second surprise. They found the bridge after 20 minutes of walking. Banks of computers lined the walls, but they were dark and silent. In the center sat a chair that looked like it was made for something with too many arms. Jake touched one of the computers and it came to life. Images flashed on the screen, worlds being built. Creatures that looked like tall humans with 4 arms working together. Ships flying between stars. Then something changed. The images showed darkness spreading across space. Worlds going silent, the 4-armed beings running and hiding. "These must be the architects," Lisa whispered. "The ones who built the habitable worlds before they disappeared." The final image showed massive shapes moving through space. They were too large to be ships and too organized to be natural. Whatever they were, they consumed everything in their path. Stars went dark. Planets turned to dust. The last image was a single word in a language that somehow translated itself in their minds. DVOURERS. Jake was about to say something when alarms started blaring on their ship. Lisa's communicator crackled with Pete's voice. "Galactic Council ships just dropped out of hyperspace. 3 destroyers. They're demanding we surrender the alien vessel." Jake looked at the computer screen, still showing images of destruction. He thought about his ruined career and his empty coffee cup and the way people looked at him like he was something unpleasant. Then he thought about what those images meant for every living thing in the galaxy. "Tell them we're just leaving," Jake said into his communicator. "They're not buying it," Pete replied. "Admiral Swift is commanding the lead ship. She's ordering us to prepare for boarding." Jake knew Admiral Swift. She had been his mentor before she was forced to court-martial him. She was a good person doing her job. That made what Jake was about to do even harder. "Fire up the engines," he said. "We're running."